Thank you so much for joining us for this morning's webinar, which is all about discussing the staff constraint we have within the sector. We know we have got a lot of staff shortage, but this webinar is about how we can retain our staff that we do have much longer. And it's all about coaching, how we can retain them and keep them happy and motivated within our settings.
We have two amazing speakers this morning, Dr. Mona Sakr and Pam McFarlane, both early years leadership and coaching experts. They're going to teach us how to create a thriving coaching culture in our settings and therefore retain our staff for longer. We'll learn the difference between coaching, mentoring and supervision and explore how we can apply the GROW, the GROW model, into our everyday conversations. First, a little bit about our speakers. Dr. Mona Sakr is a Professor of Early Childhood Education at Middlesex. Her research focus is leadership in the early years sector, particularly in the baby rooms. And among many other things, she leads a Nuffield Foundation project on high quality baby room provision in English nurseries. And Pam McFarlane is an educator with 40 years experience teaching children between 2 and 18. She's managed early years settings in Brighton and Hove for over 14 years. And she's founded Enrich Coaching for Educators to support educator wellbeing and industry challenges. So over to you, Mona.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here and giving up your time and your energy to be here. I'm talking not for very long. I want to give you a bit of a taster of what it means to create a coaching culture in your nursery. And then Pam is going to flesh that out for us and put some flesh on the bones of what I have to say in terms of early years and the reality on the ground, as it were. So my plan is to talk about three things. So first of all, I want to introduce coaching. What is coaching and what is it not? And I think that's really important to kind of outline to begin with, because it's an amazing thing to bring coaching into your setting. But also when we've got so much that we're juggling and so much that we're doing, we're mentoring, we're supervising, we're appraising, it's really important that we carve out a space for coaching that's very clear in our heads. So that's the first thing, establishing what we mean when we talk about coaching. The second thing I'll talk about is I'll introduce you to a particular model of coaching that I really like called the GROW model. And I'll break that down for you. And the reason why I really like it is it's simple, it's straightforward, and it's easy to implement straight away. You really don't need much in your back pocket to get going with the GROW model and to infuse conversations that you're having today with what you'll learn through this particular model. So that's why I want to introduce that model to you. And then I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about this idea of creating a culture that's based around coaching, because chances are that you don't have as much time as you would like to have day to day. And so actually bringing in formal coaching to your setting might feel just beyond what is available, beyond the capabilities that you have at the moment or the time and the space that you have at the moment. But what we can start to do is to use what we learn about coaching to really kind of infuse and inspire the culture in our organization. So I'm going to leave you with that idea of what can we actually take from the GROW model that just filters into how we have interactions day to day. Okay. All right. So let's kick off then. So coaching is about having a goal. This is the first thing that marks out coaching from other types of kind of mentoring or guidance or general supervision, where we're touching base with each other, we're seeing how somebody else is getting on, we're trying to help them over time. In coaching, there are parameters around it, okay? And the parameters come from having a clear goal, and often a lot of coaching is around establishing what the goal would be. What do we actually want to achieve here? Okay, but that's a really important aspect of coaching, is to establish a goal to work towards. And we also set a time limit around that. That's the other parameter. We're not saying we're going to be having these conversations in perpetuity for as long as it takes. We might be saying, actually, let's give ourselves 6 weeks on this goal, or let's give ourselves 4 months on this goal, but we set a time limit so that we don't have this sense of things kind of just dragging on and not actually working towards that goal. We want to have momentum, okay? It's also, as I said, it's not about kind of general advice or support, and it's definitely not about appraisal. So one of the ways in which coaching can flourish is when that feeling of judgment and assessment is taken out of the mix, because coaching really relies on the vulnerability of the coachee to say, this is what I want to achieve, or maybe this is something I could try. So it flourishes when you have a risk tolerant setting, when you're allowed to take risks. And of course, if you're sitting with somebody that's your line manager, who's appraising you, deciding whether you're going to be promoted and so on, it's kind of hard to bring that vulnerability into the mix and to take those risks with that person around. So it needs to be distinguished from something more general and ongoing, and it needs to be distinguished from appraisal. Ultimately, coaching is about empowering people. So that means that it's about supporting them to find the solutions, as opposed to delivering them with solutions and saying, do this, or if I were in your place, this is what I would do. Have a go at this, and then let me know how you get on. Instead, it's much more about turning things back on that individual to say, yeah, that's a really interesting scenario that you're facing at the moment. What is it that ultimately you want to get out of this? Where do you want to go with this? How could we maybe get there? Okay, so just to give a really kind of brief example, let's say you've got a particular member of staff who's been in the setting for a really long time, actually, and their work is starting to lack a bit of kind of motivation, a bit of oomph. And through these coaching conversations, what you come to is actually a kind of feeling of boredom around doing the work. Yeah, and I mean, that's pretty common in early years settings. We do a lot of, or it can feel like we're doing a lot of the same things every day. And so we get to a point of feeling bored by the work. Okay, so working with that individual in a coaching conversation, we'd be thinking, okay, well, what's the goal here? The goal might be to feel excited by the work that you're doing. Okay, and that might be what you're working towards through the coaching, empowering that individual to explore different opportunities and changes that they could make, which brings us on to this GROW model. So this is a really simple, usable model for thinking about how that conversation might play out, or how many conversations might play out over a particular time frame. Okay, so it's not that in one coaching session you might try and get through the entire GROW model. It might be that it takes quite a few sessions to go there. Okay, but essentially the GROW model breaks down into, first of all, establishing what the goal is here. Okay, so we said for that imagined individual who's feeling a little bit bored, their goal might be to feel more excited at work. Okay, that's the thing that they want to work towards. Now, exploring the realities comes next. That's the R bit. It's what's happening now, what's going on right now, and let's really unpick that and try to get under the skin of what's happening at the moment. So that might be exploring, yes, their feelings of boredom, but it's also around asking powerful questions about kind of, you know, starting to uncover the reasons for that boredom, you know. So tell me about your relationships with the children at the moment. Tell me about the relationships with the other members of your team at the moment. How are those going? Okay, tell me about kind of professional learning that you've done recently. How has that influenced you or not influenced you? And you're starting to really just kind of unpick this situation as it's unfolding to understand more about what's going on. As you do that, certain opportunities start to kind of bubble up, certain possible changes. So with this member of staff that wants to feel more excited by the work that they're doing, it might come out from discussing the realities that actually they haven't had an opportunity to do any professional learning recently that's really inspired them. You know, they've done the basics, they've stayed on top of things, but maybe there just hasn't been anything that's really spoken to them and got them excited about the work that they're doing. So bubbling up there is an opportunity and starting to scope, okay, what are some of the possible things we could do here? It might be professional learning, but they might have other ideas too. It might be, actually, I'd like to get some experience in a different room of the nursery. You know, I've been with the preschoolers a long time now, and actually I want to shake that up and I want to learn about a different age group. Or, do you know what? I know I've been doing this for a really long time, but I'd like to work towards a qualification, actually, of a particular type, because I feel like that's going to revive my interest in it. So you start to just explore these different opportunities, and ultimately you want to leave maybe that conversation, but it might be a few conversations down the line with a commitment to action, a next step. Okay, what will you do on the basis of this conversation? So it might be a really small thing to tide you over between conversations. Okay, you mentioned that professional learning on co-regulation and that you were kind of interested in that. Why don't you go and look and see what's available out there, and then bring that back to our next session and we could look at those options together. Okay, so it might be a small next step. It might be a big next step to actually, okay, you know what, I want to sign up for a qualification, or yes, actually, I'd like to speak to the manager of this other room and think about whether we could do a transition there. Okay, so we work through the goal, the realities, the opportunities, and the will do. Now, this is what we would do in a coaching session, right? We have these steps in mind. But when we think about a coaching culture, what we're trying to do is bring those questions to our day-to-day conversations. Okay, and you won't be able to suddenly magic up an hour of working through those steps really carefully. But what you can do is come back to those questions at key moments, at those critical moments. So when a member of staff comes to you with a complaint or something that's really upsetting them, maybe they've had an interaction with parents that they felt was really negative. Okay, and they come to you and they offload that interaction, and you want to jump in and say, oh, okay, no, I know about those parents, and what you need to do is this, this, and this. But instead, you ditch those instructions and instead you bring up a question. And that question might be a goal question. So it might be asking, like, what would a good interaction with that family feel like for you? What would it look like? Okay, all right. And how is it different at the moment to what ideally would happen? Okay, all right. I'm wondering if there are any things that you think we might do in this situation that would help. So you're taking some of the heat out of it. And of course, it's really important to be that listening ear and to support them with the emotional labor of working in the early years workforce. But at the same time, we're trying to back out of just telling other people what to do and instead empowering them to think for themselves and also to take a risk. So they might have an idea that's actually, you know, a little bit risky emotionally or risky. So for example, they might say, I think I'd quite like to talk to this parent about how our interactions are going. You know, I'd like to actually have that conversation because I feel like a lot of the interactions are quite negative. And I'm not sure whether they realize that, whether they feel the same way. That's a risk to have that conversation with that parent. And it might go really well and it might not. That's the definition of a risk. But if we can support within that culture to actually take those risks, and when they don't play out so well, still support that individual through it, then we're kind of empowering them to take the initiative going forward, to try and find for themselves the solutions to the problems that they face. Final point from me, and then I must hand over to Pam, but it's just to say that we're talking about powerful conversations at the end of the day. We're talking about conversations where we try to move away from just straight delegation and actually ask these powerful questions of others. That flourishes when people feel connected and a sense of belonging. Okay, so if you're being met, if your questions of what do you want to achieve here are being met with a wall of silence, or somebody that's feeling very kind of shy and reticent, it might be that actually there's a first step, and the first step is establishing more connection, more belonging, helping them to feel part of that setting and a valued member of staff, because then the questions might start to actually do that opening up work. Okay, so at this point I'm going to stop talking. Thank you so much for listening. I'm really excited to see how the discussion flows from here.
The delay, right, Pam? So that was incredible insights from Mona. So Pam, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mona. That really just encapsulates everything that we were thinking beforehand, and it gives a lovely foundation for going forward. So we talk about coaching for leaders within my company, and it's all about developing an enhanced coaching approach in the workplace. So we're going to take really what Mona says, flesh it out a bit, as she said, and then look how we can put that coaching approach over the entire workplace. So if we can go to the next slide, it centers around coaching, centers around the belief that everyone can achieve their goals through acknowledging and using their own resources rather than being told what to do. So as Mona says, it's not about telling, it's about discovery. Okay, thank you. Okay, so a coaching approach, and this is what sets a tone for a setting. And for me, it's all about an overall coaching approach. So we look at our team members, we look at our children, and we look at our parents. And each one falls within that coaching umbrella. So for everybody, it's for their well-being. For team members, it's growth and development, and it's retention. Let's keep them, let's value them, let them grow and develop at their own pace, but let's keep them. And coaching helps children. We understand that with children. We don't necessarily understand that how to do that with adults. So it's for their growth and development, and it's for expanding their world. The whole coaching skill thing about listening and questioning we can use on our children. And then on our parents, it's acknowledging them for the role that they do, and being there as a help and a support to lift up their skills, expand their knowledge on parenting, and again, give them a safe place for their questions. So a coaching approach can cover all of these aspects. The CLEAR model is very similar, but there's a contract. So our contract in terms of our overall staff is that you are here. I would like to, as a leader, grow and develop you. And the staff members, the team members are saying, I am here, I want to grow, I want to develop. So let's work together. And then this model goes into the same thing as the GROW model. It's about listening. It's about exploring, and that's asking questions. It's about actions. As Mona said, it's setting your actions, and it's within a time frame. And then you review it at the end of that time frame. So how's it going? What didn't work? What did work? So we got the skills of coaching, and these are things that we learn. Hearing and listening, two different things. So hearing is a matter of accidental, involuntary, effortless hearing. Listening, we are focused, we are voluntary, we're keen to hear. It's an intentional process. And I don't know about you guys, when you're on the floor and you are walking around with your staff and somebody will come to you and say something, and it kind of like, you look like you're listening, but it's going right over your head. because there's so much else going on. Or if somebody's coming to talk to you and you're busy focusing on your Tesco list, but you're saying all the right things. So we learn how to really listen. Thank you. Next one, please. So what does active listening look like? So as Mona said, suspend judgment. Okay. Let people be free to say what they need to say. Be curious, ask your questions, but be curious as you listen. Kind of think, what are they trying to say? What is behind this? You give them time, you give them space. You ask questions to clarify what you're hearing. And it's a very considered process. So we do a whole training on active listening because it takes practice to do. And if we commit to actively listening to our staff, then we're halfway there. But it takes effort on our part to actively listen. So open and closed questions. Now we are going to look at questions because that's a primary part of coaching. And we start with open, broad, high-level questions. So tell me more about that, as Mona was saying. Explain that to me. What do you think about that? How do you think it's going? And then you go deeper and you find out a little bit more details. Can you see this working in your team? What might make the difference? What could be the negatives in this? And you just go deeper and deeper and you clarify and say, am I hearing you correctly? Is this what you're saying? And then you review your understanding and the outcome. So you will definitely implement this by this time next week? Yes, that's a closed question. But open questions are really important. And it's a skill that we do learn. And again, it comes down to what Mona was saying as well about letting staff ask their own questions and you asking questions of staff. And we'll come to that a little bit later. Okay, thank you, Gail. Next one. Okay, so very briefly, this is all about having a coaching conversation. And with our contract in coaching, we can talk about having a coaching set of coachings, like Mona was saying, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, let's see. And we will say, okay, this is what we want out of that. And so your coaching conversation will be very direct. It will be very focused. It will be all about the coaching. And that's one kind. And then the overall coaching approach kind is where, as Mona was saying, we walk along our staff. We will, and that's mentioned in the next slide really, is where we come alongside them and we say, tell me about this. What is happening with these children right now? Or I see you feeling a bit low. You've got no energy. What's happened this morning? Can you let me in? That sort of thing. So, and with parents as well. I see the handover was really difficult. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened this morning? Giving them space to answer, giving them space to think. So these coaching conversations are worth looking at in terms of the diagram when you get it later to see what you can do to make it practical for you and meaningful. So you can use these informally and formally. So the next the next slide. So using our coaching and our management and leadership roles. Thank you, Gail. We can use informally and formally. So informally, this is where you come alongside our staff. Have you ever walked into a room and things are going absolutely pear-shaped and they're just not working? And it's very easy for us to come in and say, oh, okay, let's just stop. Let's just do this. Let's just do that. But instead, we can come in and say to the staff who are looking after the children, can you tell me what's happening? Why do you think the children are not focused? What could we do? What could we do? What could we do to make sure they re-engage or they look happier or whatever it is you want to do? So it's coming alongside staff and saying, together, we can do this. What should we do? And giving them the space for that answer. So, and also if you're in your planning, I can see this is an activity. I can see this is really working so well. Tell me more about your planning. What have you got for the future? How does that work with Johnny's needs, etc.? Really open questions on the floor. And then formally, we spoke about appraisals. Now, appraisal is a different process, as we know, but at the end, we set goals. And at that point, coaching really needs to be part of that. You can ask coaching questions during appraisals, of course, but in your goal setting, what is it that you want to achieve? What is the time frame? How do you think you're going to do that? Supervision, same thing. If it runs through with a coaching approach, people are able to then express where they're at, what they'd like to do, how they're going to get there, and it becomes a much more personal thing that they can appropriate and use. And then formally as well, the whole thing about professional discussions. Interestingly enough, recently I've come across a lot of places where professional discussions are like a rap on the knuckles. And it's like, oh, you did that wrong, so you've got a PD coming up. And people say, oh, I've got 6 PDs, or and then they begin to lose their effect. And we kind of say, well, what are they there for? And a professional discussion is a time for development and growth. So including coaching approach within that is really important, because we can ask them, why do you think this happened? What could you have differently? What would you do differently next time to provoke a better response from you? How can we help you? What are the next steps? So we can use PDs as a growth tool, not just a rap on the knuckles. And any other work reviews that you have, include questioning, include listening, and you will be amazed at what comes out. The next one, please. So action points. So these we agree on together. And it's not a question of us saying, I need you to do this and this and this. Sometimes we have to, of course. But in terms of the coaching kind of process, we agree on these together, because it's got to come from them. And how far can they go? What is the next step? Sometimes people can do 3 action points, sometimes 5. Occasionally, people might only be able to do 1. What is the next step you can do before our coaching sessions? And coaching goals need to be SMART goals. I think a lot of you know about SMART. It's well worth looking at again. We can't go into it now, but have a look. Thank you. Next one, Gail. Agreeing action points, clear communications, clear expectations, clear ways forward. Thank you. What you're looking at is something that encourages, something that builds trust. You actively listen. You ask open questions. You know and understand your team members. That's so important. You explore, you brainstorm what possibilities could be out there. You set those achievable actions, and very importantly, you celebrate success. Success celebration is a wonderful thing with coaching, because it inspires people to go the next step. So the coaching approach is all about encouragement. It's built on encouragement. Just one thing I'd like to add really is that we've got to know when to coach and when not to coach. So there's times when we mentor, as Mona said, there's times we train, there's times we teach, and there's times we model, and there's times we coach. Now, around all of that, we can have a coaching approach, but there are times when mentoring is the best way, training is the best way, teaching is the best way, and modeling is the best way. Just to end really, because you haven't got the slide, it will be in the presentation that you're sent. I've got another slide which explains that we do a 2-hour online tutor-led course in knowing how to coach, because it's all very well wanting to coach and desiring the coaching approach, but we've got to know how to do it. I'm sure Mona has some things as well that she could share as to how to learn that. We do teach that. So do get in touch with us if you would so like. Details will be on the other slide package that you will get. But in a nutshell, that's what we're looking at. Listening, not hearing, listening, questions, coaching conversations, where to use it formally and informally, and wrapping our setting within a coaching approach.
We've had a couple of questions already in, which I'm just going to quickly go through. So we've had a question that says, what is the first step to introducing a coaching culture?
So the first step really, I think, is knowledge, learning about it, first of all. What does that mean? And then and then basing your approach around encouragement, around listening, around questions, and space, giving people space. That's your kind of like first step, really. But I think knowledge is so important. You know, learn about coaching, read up about coaching, be coached yourself. What does that mean? So yeah, knowledge, and then practicing your listening and your questioning skills. That's the very start, I think.
So when we're talking about introducing a coaching culture, we're talking about a shift in your organizational culture, which is a big deal, right? I'm not going to downplay that. So when we think about shifting the culture of an organization, we've got different tools in our toolbox, and some of them have a fancy name. We're going to call them primary embedding mechanisms, and we've got secondary embedding mechanisms. Let me break that down. Basically, it means there are some things we do first, and then there are some things that we carry on doing in order to sustain that culture. So the first things that we do are actually be explicit about the culture that we're trying to create. So just as Pam is saying, you know, you've got to know the coach, what you want to do. So you've got to understand coaching yourself. Once you feel like you have a vision of how you want that coaching to be part of the day-to-day, the easiest starting point for making that part of your culture is to be explicit about that being part of the culture. So that means a kind of reset in team meetings. That means saying to people, actually, what we're going to try from now on is to take this coaching approach. And what's that going to look like? It's going to look like us asking each other more questions more often. And it might feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. So actually to be explicit about this cultural change that you're trying to make is really important as a first thing. The other kind of primary embedding mechanism that you have at your fingertips is you. It's your modeling, it's your role modeling, and hopefully that kind of trickling down through the organization. So it's you embodying that coaching approach, and then it's you supporting your middle leaders, for example, to embody that coaching approach. And then it's the middle leaders modeling constantly to the people that they work with this coaching approach. So those are the first things that we do. And then there are things that over time, checking in, reflective practice, making sure that these things are happening day to day and being super kind of reflective on it, also celebrating when it happens. So, you know, the first time that you bite your tongue and instead of telling somebody what to do, but you ask a powerful question, that's something to actually note in yourself and celebrate. And the first time you see somebody else doing it, that's something to note and to celebrate kind of collectively as a community. So kind of, yeah, the first thing to do, as Pam's saying, absolutely, is for you to feel comfortable with it. But once you have that level of comfort and confidence about what you're trying to create, then you can start to go to the community and say, we're going to try and do this.
Fantastic. Wow, that was very comprehensive. Thank you so much. You've kind of answered the second question, which is about also the motivation. There's the different things of what motivates different people, isn't it? But in your setting, what do you think how can you motivate your team to make sure that they actually have buy-in to the coaching culture? I know you spoke about role modeling, which I think is fundamental, but have you come across anything maybe else? Maybe Mona, maybe Pam, start with this one maybe for you, because I know you've had your own settings that you've run. What have you used to kind of motivate or get your staff to buy in to it?
I think as Mona was saying, actually the first thing is to make sure that you are doing it, and they can see that. But I used to have a very collaborative approach. So anything new, I would make that known to the staff. So our staff meetings are always full of joy, actually, full of learning, full of games, full of all sorts of things, and really hard stuff as well. But at those kind of meetings, I would explain things like this. So this is what we're aiming for. This is what we mean. This is how we're going to get there. So it's really important to get your staff on board and say, you know, be vulnerable as well. I'm new at this, but we're going to give this a shot. We're going to give people space. So a little bit of vulnerability goes a long way. And I also think, I don't know if this is allied to this question, but it's good to be accountable to somebody. So get somebody on your side and say, how am I doing? Let me know. Let me check in with you and see how am I doing in this new way of doing things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Pamela, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, really interesting. And absolutely, Pam, I couldn't agree more about the vulnerability. A little bit of vulnerability goes a long way. In terms of motivation, sorry, I keep on coming with the very scientific answers, but we can break motivation down into 6 types. And I would say that coaching feeds into at least 3 of them, right? So a lot of people naturally are fed by achievement motivation. They are goal oriented. So you will have lots of educators in your setting that love ticking things off. You know, the kind of people that go, okay, what do I need to do today? I've got my to-do list. I'm going to tick this off. Those people naturally gravitate towards coaching if the emphasis is on achieving your goals. Similarly, though, you've got people that are really high on affiliation motivation. That means that they're driven by a sense of belonging and community. So for them, when you're introducing the coaching, it's really important to say, this is going to bring us closer together. This is a way for us to feel a stronger sense of community. So basically you can sell, because you said buy into a coaching culture. Well, you can sell the coaching culture, appealing to different types of motivation. And the top ones that come to my head, achievement motivation, because those people are goal orientated already. Affiliation motivation, because people love to have a sense of belonging in the community that they're part of. But also something like competence motivation, so just feeling good at your job. So if you say that this is part of what it means to work in this place and to be an educator that works in this setting, you need to be doing these things. People that are driven by competence motivation will automatically want to do that thing that you said is really important. So thinking about kind of motivation, different types of motivation, and how you introduce coaching in relation to those different types of motivation can help.
One of the questions we've had is around, obviously we know there's a staff shortage within the sector, and have you used incentives, and have you seen if you potentially invest in the staff that you retain them longer with this coaching culture, because coaching and mentoring goes alongside any training and development that you do. How important is that, and is there any techniques that you have used within settings that potentially we can share with other fellow practitioners?
In order to retain staff, you mean? Yeah. I think all those things you've said, but for me, what has worked over and over is knowing your staff, knowing their story, because you do get their stories, having a safe space. So them knowing, so that if they speak to you, it's going to be in confidence. Them knowing that you will carry their worries with care. Them also knowing that actually you expect a high standard, and them being comfortable with that, but knowing that if they fail, actually you will be there, and with coaching and mentoring and all the other things, you will raise their level or whatever it is. So I think being there for staff, having an open door policy where mini coaching sessions can happen unexpectedly is really important. And it's making those staff feel valued. If they're feeling valued, they will stay. So for me, it's really that interpersonal space that you create with your staff. So they are clear on their value, they're clear on the expectations you have on them, and then you can move forward together.
Brilliant. We just had Rakia, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, just said that in their section they value staff's birthdays, they sing happy birthday to each other and get a birthday cake in. They also have employee of the month that is very target driven. That's a really good way to keep staff motivated. So that's a lovely share. Thank you so much. And we have one last question that's in the chat, which just maybe Mona, if you want to answer this one. Different people respond to different things. So what potentially could be the biggest challenge if you have people, let's go and add to that question, that potentially isn't engaged, isn't motivated by coaching style? How can you convert that staff member to see the positive in that actually and overcome that barrier?
I think actually the biggest barrier is not motivation or buy-in. I think the biggest barrier is confidence, because most often what I see is that when people don't want to respond to those powerful questions, don't want to think through the issue for themselves, don't want to come up with potential solutions, it's not that they actually don't want to do those things, it's that they really lack the confidence. And we are a sector where unfortunately so many educators do not have confidence in their own abilities and in what they're bringing, the contribution that they're making. So I think a huge effort needs to be made, particularly with newer, younger members of staff, around building up confidence. And that comes back to this thing around two things, around connection and around kind of taking risks. A risk in your mind as a leader might be very different to a risk in the mind of an apprentice who's just starting out. A risk, you might not even recognize that they are taking a risk, but actually, just as Pam's saying, knowing the story of that individual and really listening to them gives them the space to let you into the fact that actually it's a risk for them to speak to a particular parent at the end of the day. It makes them feel anxious. It makes them feel nervous. It's a big deal when they've done it, because when you get that insight, then you can celebrate those things with you. They can celebrate those things with you, and you can make a big deal out of them. And it's only through that, just as with children, right? It's through somebody recognizing when you've progressed, you've made some kind of progress, somebody else going, wow, you did that? That's amazing. And paying attention to it, that gives us that little boost and we start to open ourselves up. So actually, I would say the biggest challenge to a coaching culture in early years specifically is the lack of confidence that educators often feel, despite being the best people in the world. And so we need to be really attuned to that as leaders and kind of creating a culture that's about confidence building. Mm-hmm. The coaching comes in as part of that then.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, guys. Mona and Pam, I just wanted to say amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great. If you have any other questions, do email marketing@parenta.com and we'll be able to ask our speakers today to be able to answer that for you and get back to you with any additional questions. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And hopefully this has helped you retain your staff for longer and practices and techniques you can put into practice to keep your staff for longer, because we know there's a shortage. But thank you so much for joining us today and have a lovely day. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.